Hey there, Sammy here. Welcome to another episode of Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. Today we were talking about how to take your in-person fundraiser online. And I'm super excited to be joined by Staci West, who is a part of the United Way in Tri-Cities, Washington. And she is going to share with us kind of a two-part. We're going to do a two-part episode. So the first part is today, where we're talking about how they've chosen to take their in-person event online, what they're doing, how they're making it all work. And then we're going to check back in with her in early December after their event has happened and see how it went, what worked, what didn't, what was amazing, what they might change next time, and how it would look if they were going to be doing this event the same way in 2021. So I'm really excited about it. We have great conversation. She has lots of insight to share, lots of examples. So you'll definitely want to check out the show notes for this episode at thefirstclick.net/podcast so that you can find some of the resources for things that they're using for their online event. So Staci West is communications manager for Bechtel in Tri-Cities, Washington. She has 20 plus years experience developing, implementing, and leading national media outreach and public relations campaigns for science, technology, and environmental organizations. She was a board member with the United Way of Benton and Franklin counties for 6 years and has served as the planning committee chair for its Festival of Trees Gala, which raises money to fight hunger and homelessness. Staci grew up in Seattle and transplanted to the beautiful and warm east side of Washington state 25 years ago, and since then has discovered the joys of the rivers and wineries in the area. So much good stuff in this episode. I can't wait for you to hear it. But before we get into it, this episode is brought to you by our brand new guide, 9 Ways to Help Nonprofits Raise More Money Online. So make sure you download it at thefirstclick.net/fundraiser. You don't have to do all 9 right now. Pick the quick wins that you can get right away, but I promise you there's some good stuff in there for ways to keep those online funds coming in the door so that you can continue to reach your fundraising goals for 2020 and beyond. Okay, so thefirstclick.net/fundraise. Let's get into this episode. You're listening to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Sammy Bedell-Mulhern, and each week I bring you tips from myself and other experts, as well as hot seats with small business owners and entrepreneurs to demystify digital marketing and get you on your way to generating more leads and growing your business. Please join me in welcoming Staci West to the Digital Marketing Therapy Podcast. Staci, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So you work for United Way. So why don't you kind of share a little bit about what you do there, kind of who you serve, how you serve them. I think people are probably familiar with United Way, but I think in every community it might be a little bit different.
Yeah, so I have been a board member of the United Way for about 6 years and got started with them just through knowing their marketing manager, and was very intrigued by the approach they take where they don't serve just one cause in the community. They really help address all of the different needs that the community has. And so as I was a board member a few years ago, I was part of a planning committee for their first ever fundraiser. And so my board term expired last year, but my company that I'm with, Bechtel, we're the presenting sponsor for that fundraiser each year. And I've stayed the planning committee chair for that event. And our local United Way serves Benton and Franklin counties, which is about 300,000 people in the surrounding area. And they've really pivoted, as we're all saying, the last several months with COVID, and raised a few $100,000 through different grants and donations for their COVID emergency rapid response fund.
That's great. It's definitely a new era of fundraising. And I'm excited for this conversation because, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're doing a two-parter because you guys have this annual event called the Festival of Trees, which is happening in November, correct?
That's right, November 21st.
And now being taken online. So we wanted to do this so we could talk about kind of what's happening right now in your planning process, and then afterwards kind of what that looks like, because you've never done this online before, correct?
We have not. No, it's this will be our third year, so it's a fairly new event, and we've done it in person the last 2 years at the Three Rivers Convention Center in Kennewick.
In Washington, yeah. So why don't you share kind of what the Festival of Trees is, and then let's kind of jump into some of the decision making that you guys have done around how you're putting this event together.
And so the Festival of Trees is has been an in-person event where businesses sponsor a tree that we provide a artificial tree, and then they decorate the trees in different themes. We've had some amazing fun tree themes, from Dr. Seuss to a princess tree to ones for adults with a Red Mountain AVA wine tree last year. And we've had upwards of about 300 people attend in person. And it's such a wonderful way to kick off the holidays with these gorgeous 10 trees and gifts set up in the convention center hall. And then we auction those off, and we raise money to fight hunger and homelessness in the Tri-Cities community. And it's just been a great in-person event. We were really creating good momentum and getting lots of excitement building in the community for this. And I know there's Festival of Trees events around the region and probably across the country. But it's one of our challenges is what people will be bidding on and purchasing are trees that you want to see in person.
Yeah, I know it's not something that you can, I mean, the experience of walking into a room and seeing all of those trees lit up and beautiful has to be amazing.
Yeah, I love this event because it's held right before Thanksgiving, and it just gives you that excitement for the holidays, and kicks it off in style, but also with other people. So it helps build that community feel right before the holidays, and to know right before the holidays you're doing something good for those in need.
Yeah. And so now, with COVID happening, you probably had to come to terms with, okay, are we still going to do this event? I mean, obviously we still have a little bit of time till November, but you guys have been planning pretty heavy the last few months. But what was the conversation like with your team when you were like, okay, well, are we still going to try to figure out how to move forward with this event? Or are we just going to cancel it and do something different?
So we were fortunate that we had gotten together, had our committee set, and already had a few initial planning meetings in January and February, because our plan this year was to be more organized and get things done sooner than the last 2 years.
Yep.
So
little did you know.
So much for those of us with control freak issues. And so we actually had also planned to do something different this year, and that was to hire a professional auctioneer out of Seattle. His name's Fred Northrup Jr. And when COVID hit and we, started seeing the closures, and then for our local community, we were not reopening very quickly compared to some other areas. We put a pause on it for a couple of months because we really didn't know what to expect. And so we ended up reaching out to Fred, and soon after the closures were hitting in Washington State, because that's where one of the first cases of COVID-19 was identified, he started doing virtual online events. And so we were fairly blessed that we had someone who every weekend was starting to work with organizations, and they were pivoting to the virtual approach. And so we went to him and said, how does this work? What results are you seeing? And had a conversation with our United Way chapter CEO, just talking through what are the risks of trying or assuming we could do an in-person event again. And we just planned conservatively from the beginning. to do a virtual event. The outstanding question for us would be what kind of in-person aspect of an online event could you do? Such as now we have in our community started allowing, more indoor dining at restaurants and gatherings of 5 people at this point. And so a lot of the conversation continues to be, how do we get the trees set up in a place that people can legally, according to the rules, visit and get to see the trees in person, even if the night of the event it's virtual.
Almost like a tour of homes.
Yes, in fact, we're playing with the idea of calling it the tour of trees. Yes.
I love it. Well, and I think what I love about your story and kind of what makes you guys unique is that you are doing trees. So it's not, I think for a lot of people to take an event online is a little bit easier because, it might just be your standard live auction items that you don't have physically present anyway, but you're dealing with giant Christmas trees. And so It's a whole nother set of challenges that you have to deal with. Because then there's also the decorating time and the pickup and the drop off and all of those logistics that you need to work through.
Absolutely. And hotels, if we, so we did reach out to a few hotels to find out, what were the options for having the tour of trees in one of their ballrooms where you have a large space. You can have, 5 people reserve a space online to tour the trees in a small group. But, hotel ballrooms can be $1,000 a night to rent. And
Absolutely.
if you wanted to do it over several days, that gets very cost prohibitive for, a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. No, that's super tricky. So where have you guys, or have you landed on a solution then for how you're going to allow people to view the trees?
So we don't have an answer yet from the organization we've reached out to, but we are have put in a request that a handful of local wineries would be the location for 2 to 3 trees each, and we could do a tour of trees through the Tri-Cities wine country. And if we get that set up a couple weekends before, perhaps we could drive more traffic to the wineries in a quiet time of the year for them in November, provide people a place that they could view the trees. And then the night of the event, our finale idea would be to have VIP multi-course meals at those wineries with the trees around them. And so that would be, again, if we're in a place where you can do indoor dining, where a couple could get tickets and have a table for 2 and have a space large enough that it's safe and follows the COVID protocols, but you still get some of that feeling of the holiday spirit.
That's such a great idea. And I brought this up in a previous podcast episode for, a lot of people do tasting events or wine events or whatever. And maybe you have all those restaurants or wineries or breweries already linked up but now you can't do that in-person event. Even doing things like creating goodie baskets with stuff that gets delivered to the door of the VIP, that night. There's so many ways you can still bring those people into the experience and make it special. So I think that winery idea is brilliant.
And what we found,
partnership.
Yeah. And what we found with our planning committee, many of them represent businesses of all sizes, and a few of those committee members are on boards. And early on, when we kind of relaunched our planning, the desire was there among everyone to see how do we benefit businesses. Typically for an event, we would be going around asking for donations from local businesses. And so now the question is, can we get, for example, our board members to each purchase a gift card to a restaurant and a bottle of wine from a local winery and donate those for our online auction, so that we're still supporting local businesses and getting great auction items, but not having to ask those businesses to give when they don't have as much capacity to give right now financially.
Yeah. And I think that's so in line with United Way's community-minded foundation, right?
Mm-hmm.
They may not be nonprofits that you're supporting, but yet they're a community that is, it's a cyclical thing, right? Like ultimately, if businesses aren't doing well, then they can't also come back and support those community organizations as well. So I think that's such a great way to kind of bring that together. Yeah. I want to jump into the tech because I feel like that's where a lot of people get stuck. I've talked to several nonprofits about doing online fundraisers, even like for the last few years. And it's always this thing of like, it just feels overwhelming. So when you knew that you kind of needed to go this route anyway, luckily, like you said, you had an auctioneer who was, experienced in doing this. So that was good. What was the biggest hurdle with kind of trying to figure out the tech pieces, like what software you were going to use and all of that stuff? Who was going to manage it?
Yeah, so we have, the United Way has the Greater Giving software, and I know there's a lot of great software programs out there. We discovered that, there is a piece that you have to do online live bidding. And so we needed to verify we had that. There will be a lot more time and energy required of the United Way marketing team and others. And so, one of the challenges is making sure we know the software good enough to actually, the night of an event, manage the closing of silent auction items in the right order, the closing of the live auction items as those are bid and sold. And then one thing that I have probably watched 10 different live auctions. I've registered for events all across the country because there's not a charge to attend. And so I'm watching and learning. And I watched the auction of Washington wines a few weeks ago that benefits Washington State University's winery program and Seattle Children's Hospital. And it was great to see how the software works and what it looks like for one of the attendees, if you will, online.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think the online auction software is critical. The different companies have lots of videos online that you can watch and get a sense of the capabilities. And then I know a lot of organizations, struggle with, do you use Zoom? Can you use Facebook Live? With Facebook Live, people need to have a Facebook account in most cases, and not everyone's comfortable with that. For us, we knew we wanted those trees to be bid on live. And so some events are going virtual, but it's not interactive in that they may be having their event and talking about the silent auction, but they may not have a live auction piece. And so what we're doing is a live auction of those trees. And so Fred, who we had hired as the MC auctioneer, he's worked with a couple of production companies in Seattle. And so just this week we were talking with those companies, getting bids and proposals in for how you work that. And, there's anyone who wants to Google it on YouTube, the Bellevue Art Museum had a great, virtual online live auction in the last few months that Fred did. And it's, this beautiful, huge stage that costs much more than we could ever pay. But they do have small spaces that you can use. And so we're going to have someone helping run the auction software for the live event, and then Fred at a production facility in Seattle doing our event. And, again, that comes with costs that you wouldn't get with Zoom or Facebook Live. But because we have that live auction piece, we really need those production capabilities.
So what was it like then with your team? So, okay, I feel like when you're usually it's a gala or it's a big event. You have production costs in general when you're running those big events. You have the ballroom space, like you said, or the hotel space. You have the catering. You have, if you're running a large gala, if that's your main fundraiser or your event that you typically do, there's a ton of costs that are associated with that in-person event anyway. So I know you mentioned it was kind of a leap to kind of go that next step with the auctioneer, because, a really good auctioneer can help also increase the sales and the energy of the room. So that was already a leap. But what was it like for your board and the team there to say, okay, we're going to now take an additional leap of faith and pay for this software? And then, another leap of faith for this production, hoping that it's all going to turn into this magical experience and we're still going to meet or exceed our fundraising goals.
Well, I think with a lot of things during COVID, it's you're making the best guess you can and trying to make the best decisions you can, and it's a leap of faith in some ways. And so the conversation has been, how do we raise as many funds as possible, and what are the different costs associated with doing that in a virtual environment? And honestly, I doubt myself a little bit of, I know that the program will be flawless to go this route. What I don't know and can only hope for is that people are as or more generous than in the past to make up for some of the increased costs, because we were so fortunate that the last couple of years we had a lot of local businesses supporting us and sponsoring us and the event to help cover costs of an in-person event. The decor, for example, we've had donated and had at very low cost. And so now we have new costs that actually make the operations of this potentially more expensive if we're not able to get some of those sponsors. And because of COVID, but also because we waited and paused to see, where we would be at and what was feasible for an event, we are behind in getting sponsors, and we're just not seeing either the level of sponsorship or the speed of people getting back to us about sponsors. And so right now, we're in that moment where we're about to commit to additional operating costs for this live production, but we haven't yet brought in the sponsors that, we're taking this leap of faith will come.
Now, do you feel that by doing something virtual, you can reach a broader audience? I mean, I know like United Way is a little bit unique in that it does support like your local communities, but then, depending on the organizations, there's grandparents and there's aunts and uncles, and there's other people that are impacted that don't live there. Have loved ones there. So are you reaching out to like a broader audience to try to like build that extra space?
Yeah, so we do hope to have, more people engaged either the night of the live event or throughout the couple weeks before with an online auction. We aren't charging for the event, as many events are not doing, and so number one, you can get people to participate and not have to pay to be there in person. We're going to try to generate virtual watch parties, give people ideas of, a girls' night in, and or have a scotch and cigar night and watch, or, participate as a quote unquote table sponsor, even if it's the table at your house for your friends instead of at the convention center. And so we do hope we have people who maybe have not attended in the past who are interested. And then promotional wise, one of our sponsors has talked about potentially having the tree they're doing set up in their bank space, because they do have customers come through. And And so they would be publicizing that. If we do trees at wineries, we're hoping those businesses would be promoting that as well. And so for us, the question is making sure the word gets out so that people even know that, they can log in and watch, and they can bid on a tree or just look at the trees, but also trying to get more silent auction items, because the more of those great items we have, if we have more people engaging with us, then perhaps we can, raise more money for the cause.
Yeah. And I reference this episode so many times in all my recent podcasts because I feel like it's just really relevant to so many things. But I want you guys, I'll put this in the show notes. We did an episode that's all about how to create the promo kit. So how, like, the graphics, the copy, everything. So just like what you're saying, to give them the tools in order for them to promote for you easily. So you'll definitely check that out. I'll put that in the show notes for this episode, but it's episode 68. But you'll want to check that out and create your promo kit, make your life easier if you're running these kinds of events, so that you can use your board members, your sponsors, and everybody has everything they need pulled together to kind of do that promotion. And you may have already done that, but I throw that episode out in almost every episode I talk about because it's so important.
Yeah. Well, I will say one thing that I have appreciated so much is, with all the research I've been doing online on Facebook and YouTube of other organizations that moved to a virtual event, I've reached out to 3 or 4 of them and asked questions about how they did it or different features they had. And they have all gotten back to me more than willing to not only answer my questions, but share what was their watch party guide and how did they do that. And so I'm just grateful that the nonprofit community is so supportive. And so I would tell anyone, don't hesitate to just reach out and ask organizers of other events, to share what they've done, answer questions, even share their resources.
Yeah. And I also want to make clear, because you might be thinking, okay, well, if you're just running this event on Zoom, like, how do people actually bid? So the Greater Giving software, or whatever software that you use, is typically an app that people download on their phone, and then the auction and everything runs through that. So you're not creating the tech that's actually taking the money in, that's, running the live auction, that's doing all of that. It's typically done virtually via a third-party app that you choose that has the features that you need to kind of run how the bidding works, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the video piece is just how you communicate with your audience during the event and that experience that you create.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of those software programs even have, a website you can create with their software for your event. And so we'll plan on doing that.
Yeah. And I'll be interested to hear, once it's all done, what, I think the thing for me that's so interesting right now is, like, what is it going to look like next year when you're running this event? Like, what are you going to learn from this that's going to actually be better than you ever expected? And you're going to say, why haven't we done this forever? Versus what are the things you want to go back to? So I think for me, I'm excited to hear how organizations continue to create this hybrid model.
I wouldn't be surprised if we continue to have some sort of virtual piece. We've not had an online auction the last 2 years. And so perhaps we'd continue with that. But also, who's to say you have to be in person to bid on a tree? We've all seen the movies and TV shows where you have the person at the auction house, in New York or London, on the phone taking anonymous bids. And so we could potentially still have a virtual piece to the live auction.
I love it. Well, is there anything else you want to share about your planning process that you think might be helpful to organizations that are kind of working on this right now?
I would say one of the surprising pieces is it's just as much work. It's just different work and different knowledge you need to have. So now, instead of spending time thinking about what the decor looks like and how many charger plates or what's the menu, the length of the tablecloth for the cost, right? it's a whole different conversation. And now we look at, what's the technology? How do we have an FAQ for people on, what kind of smart TV they need, or what kind of program in order to have a YouTube streaming on their TV for a watch party. And the volunteers we need are different. So early on, we had volunteers really excited about decor, and we knew we could start working on decor immediately. Now we have less about decor and more, again, about, what's the logistics of how we get meals to sponsors, and who's going to help, deliver those or man a location where people come pick them up. And so it's just as much work, perhaps more, as we all come up to speed on the tech side of it, but also a different skill set in volunteers and even your planners you might need.
Yeah, for sure. And I think day of, it's a whole different set of concerns as far as making it go off without a hitch, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The online world, anything based in technology, you could have glitches that you don't anticipate, and you need experts there to help.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I think you guys have come a long way in creating something in an experience that's still magical and impactful. I'm excited to see how it all plays out. I'm excited to talk with you in early December about how it all played out and what it looked like. But if people want to learn more about your event, maybe potentially participate, how do they find out about Festival of Trees?
So you can go to the United Way's Benton of you can go to the United Way of Benton and Franklin County's website via Google, and under events there'll be Festival of Trees information, and we're in the process of getting a United Way Festival of Trees Facebook page started up, so that should be live in the next week.
Oh, great. And we'll link all of those up in the show notes to make it easier for everybody to find those. But Staci, thank you for coming on and talking openly about kind of the struggles and the good and the bad about how you're moving through this. I know a lot of nonprofits are all in the same boat, so it's helpful to hear stories of how people are moving forward.
And thank you for giving us a forum to hear best practices and know we're not alone in trying to figure it all out this year.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll talk to you in a few months.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you to Staci West for taking time out of her day to talk with me and to share with all of you kind of what they're going through, decisions that they've made, the leaps of faith that they're taking in order to make this event go forward. So I hope that you got inspired and you learned something from her. So check out the show notes again at thefirstclick.net/podcast. Lots of good stuff in there, and I will see you in the next episode.